Hey guys, this is Ц.Анхбаяр from Lemon Press, and today we have a special guest from the States, Чарльз Хоскинсон, the founder of Cardano and co-founder of Ethereum, and founder and CEO of Output Global. Thank you for being here, Charles.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, so this is your third time visiting Mongolia.
Yeah.
How much has changed since you last came here?
Well, I came before COVID, and the first thing I noticed is you guys have a new airport, so that took a little time to get out. Traffic is still pretty bad, although I used to live in Jakarta, so nothing is comparable to Indonesia's traffic. It's like Ubi looks like a walk in the park. But all things considered, it's really impressive to see the amount of growth and the steady development of not only the cryptocurrency ecosystem in Mongolia, but just the professionalism of the business community as well. We've had an opportunity being here for 10 days to meet with everybody from the guys who run Gobi Kashmir to AmCham to a lot of local business leaders and government officials, everyone from the U.S. ambassador to the president's party that he hosted on the opening of Nadam. And it was just really nice to see that there's a lot of optimism and excitement. COVID's certainly been very difficult for the world, but Mongolia is moving ahead. And this is a very fertile, great place to do product development. And it's a great place to have discussions with everything from digital transformation to supply chains. So it's an exciting marketplace.
True. I actually agree with you there. And how did the meeting with the government of Mongolia go?
Well, they've been always open. The United States, it takes weeks or months. It's rescheduling and this, that, and you walk in and you get no clear answers. Here, it's very clear that the government is aligned with a growth agenda and economic progress. So while governments change, and new president since the last time I came, and obviously a change out in the parliament, but nothing has changed from the perspective of a desire to make things better. And that could be everything from cleaner air to less traffic congestion to better supply chains or digital transformation. So from that perspective, it's very refreshing. It's nice to see a country that's committed to improving itself and a country that's committed to becoming a good member of the global community and being able to represent all of their citizens in that respect. So they've been very positive meetings. It's been quite easy to get meetings with people. Even during Nadam, they were willing to do that, which is historically a very difficult time. Most people are focused on family and the holiday. So this is a little bit more of a tourism time. And yet, despite that, there was still a warmness, friendliness, and openness, and a willing to be flexible in schedules, which we really appreciated.
That's glad to hear, actually. So you were mentioning about the third world countries. Developing countries can be good ground for innovation in your previous interviews and podcasts. And even I can read it on Cardano's website. Why did you think so? And why did you think Mongolia was a great place for testing or coming here? And in essence, I guess, why Mongolia?
So developing nations have disadvantages and advantages. The disadvantages is that because the economies are not at scale and they haven't been fully realized, generally speaking, the root causes of those things tend to inhibit future growth and opportunity. So in many cases, you see inefficient systems. In some cases, you can see corruption. There's a long list of factors. It just depends on the jurisdiction. So Ethiopia and Burundi are very different nations with their own difficulties than Mongolia, for example. So we tend to look at jurisdictions from different perspectives. So in Ethiopia, that's a very closed economy that's trying to figure out how to open itself. They have strict capital controls, government monopolies, and obviously internal conflict, especially with the Tigrayan conflict at the moment. So that's probably the hardest jurisdiction one can operate in. Burundi, it's a much more open place, but it's the fourth poorest country in the world. And only 11% of people have power and 2.6% of people have smartphone penetration. Now contrast that to Mongolia, which 95% have smartphones. And there's actually a reasonably high banking penetration throughout the entire economy. But what's really exciting about Mongolia is a very unique country with a long legacy and history. It's one of the few countries that you can go to where reliably you can find people who speak Russian, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, and English. It's like no other country in the world has that kind of linguistic diversity. It's also one of the few countries where you have an urbanized capital, so Ubi, which has 1.5 million people, but you go a few kilometers outside the city And then suddenly you have Gers and nomads. And so to have a coexistent population of a legacy lifestyle, a nomadic lifestyle with an urbanized lifestyle, and they just kind of blend together and seamlessly move between the two, it means that the products and solutions that you built there are very universal. So even though there's only 3 million people here, they could be quite applicable to much larger cities like Beijing or go up north and other jurisdictions. So we felt that this was a great product development market for supply chain, digital transformation, identity, these types of things. The other thing is that Mongolia has a long legacy of strong math and science education. It's kind of a legacy from the Russian systems that came through. So the math Olympiads, these types of things. And that has definitely stayed here. So we said if we wanted to have a good labor market where we train developers to build things and engineer things, this is a very nice place to do it. We have very friendly terms with the United States, visa-free travel. It's easy to move around for me to come to Mongolia. And it's very easy for us to set up a business. The American Chamber of Commerce is very strong here. So we said, all right, very least, it would be a great idea to every year invest in education, work with the ministries, work with the local universities, work with academic partners, and then train cohort after cohort of young Mongolian graduates and convert them into very elite developers. Our company focuses on quality over quantity. We don't commoditize development. Despite the fact that we're in over 50 countries, we only have 700 employees. So we don't look at scale from a perspective of how many people. We look at scale in terms of tools, techniques, and thought process. So our average employee has a master's degree. Many hold PhDs. We've written over 140 academic papers.
Wow.
So when we train developers, we don't train them to be web developers. We train them to be really, really elite, hardcore infrastructure developers that use techniques like formal methods. And many of our people, we actually pay for them to go to Western universities and get master's degrees or other such things. So for example, the educational outreach that we're doing here, we've already done one class, and it was a bit disrupted because of COVID, but we still were able to graduate some candidates. And those candidates we graduated are now working for us. And one of which, who's Mongolian, is actually likely going to go to Scotland to complete a PhD. In the computer science, and then continue to work with us beyond that. Our hope is to replicate that course and train every year dozens of developers and then send them to Western universities for finishing, and then come back to Mongolia to build product solutions and services. So it's a great market. It's a very diverse market. It's one that tends to have an enormous amount of influence. And there's also a lot of good philosophy here. I'm friends with the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Zogbatar, and I had dinner with him recently, and he said, Mongolia was the country that introduced communism to Korea and to China. And now that we're in democracy, maybe we can be the country that introduces democracy to China and to Korea. So there's a pride there, and there's a history there. And so if you're going to do digital transformation, maybe Mongolia can be the country that shows the rest of the world how to do that. Because it's at the right scale that we can move quickly, but there's still enough people that it's a meaningful experiment that covers pretty much every case, from infrastructure security to transportation, smart city initiatives, medical records, education, digital identity for all the people, voting systems. There's also a strong desire for sovereignty. So whatever system has to be put in has to be uniquely Mongolian. It can't be the proxy of the United States, China, Russia, or another power. So if you're going to Burundi or other places and there's a need for these types of things, it's actually much more attractive saying that we've deployed a system in Mongolia than we deployed it in Wyoming or Colorado or California. Because they say, oh, well, if it works there, it can work here. And, obviously Mongolia's requirements are much more aligned with nation states like that.
That's great, actually. You were talking about your company, and of course, we're going to have to talk about Input Output Global Inc. So before we get into the company itself, we're going to have to talk about blockchain generally, because I understood that IO Global is a blockchain engineering company and research institute, right? Let's talk about those. Let's talk about blockchain in general. Like, why are you doing this?
So our vision is to improve the systems of the world for everyone, everywhere. And that's kind of a interesting term. So systems can be voting systems, they can be supply chain systems, they can be land registration systems, but basically some protocol, some collection of customs where people agree to work together for a common social good, implicitly or explicitly. So you explicitly write it all down. Implicitly, it's kind of like the markets where it just kind of self-assembles and happens, but nobody sits down and tries to say, oh, you put your booth over there, you do that over here. Even in communist nations, people tend to, capitalism tends to leak its way in. You know, I was in Vietnam not too long ago, and it rained in Ho Chi Minh, and then suddenly all these umbrella salesmen just appeared out of nowhere. You know, it's like the self-assembling capitalism for you. We decided to build a company that really thinks deeply about the systems of the world and how does one engineer for the 21st century. Most of the institutions and ways that we think are inherited from the 20th century, and those assume hierarchical, top-down businesses and clearly defined borders, and a nation state runs them. But we don't live in a world like that. We live in a global economy. The things that happen here in Mongolia can have a huge impact in California. The things that happen in California can have a huge impact in Zanzibar. So if you're in a global economy that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, where people, thoughts, money move very rapidly, the types of systems you need, governance you need, companies you need, they all have to be distinctly different. So my company is really about thinking through that global transformation and asking what type of tools and software and training and consulting need to be done to help nations, companies, and individuals adapt and change for that. So cryptocurrencies are quite attractive because they solve the problem of representing and moving value all around the world. So you can be, a great example would be, let's say you talk about a cashmere manufacturing. So let's say I'm in San Francisco, or I'm in London, and I go into a high-end store and I see all these pieces of cashmere, hopefully Gobi cashmere, and it has a QR code on it. Now, in a blockchain-based future, one of the things you can do is you'll be able to take your phone, scan that QR code, and it's going to show you the entire history of the garment, starting with the goat herder all the way to how it was aggregated, how it was washed and processed, how it was dyed, the dyes that were used, the different countries that touched it. And you can even see pictures of the people who were involved, not just a name, but actually a location and so forth. Well, that's kind of like level one, but blockchain allows you to keep going. You can then say, well, what if you just like the garment so much that you want to give a tip to the goat herder? Ordinarily, that'd be impossible to do. But in this type of a system, there's actually a payment address. So you can just send digital value, and you can just wake up and then suddenly money appears in his wallet. Never met you, you've never met him, but yeah, you like the finished product. So this is just that amazing transformation that's possible. And whatever your policy objective happens to be, whether it be environmental policy or sustainable business practices or governance or fair trade, it enables you to do that and interface with global markets in a different way. So that's a system. And blockchains basically are kind of the connecting tissue for the systems we'd like to build. They're just these things that live in the sky. Nobody controls them. And anything that you put in them are time-stamped, so you know when you put it in. They're immutable, meaning you can't change it. And they're auditable, meaning that you can check it yourself. The auditability is very important, especially with things like voting systems. So in America, if I vote at the moment, I can't check my vote. I just hope it's been recorded. Second, I can't check if my vote's been recorded correctly. So I don't know if they've recorded the vote, and if they did record the vote, it was recorded correctly. Third, I can't check the integrity of the entire election system. So I have no way as an individual of knowing if it's a fair election or not. So I have to trust the government to tell me that. Okay, they usually do a decent job, and we hope that. But then every now and then people say they don't. Well, wouldn't it be nice that I could just vote on my phone, and after I voted, I can check the vote, check it was recorded correctly, and verify the integrity of the entire election system? It turns out that problem is actually the same problem as tipping the goat herder with the cashmere. They're actually the same technology, and they're the same infrastructure in that respect. That's basically what blockchain enables, and the cost of moving from one to the other is actually quite small. So, for example, you can take a nation state's voting tools and then port them over, and now people in the supply chain can vote. The goat herder can vote for things that are relevant to that. The customers can vote, for example. So all kinds of little things like that. So that's what we do as a company. And some of this requires deep and detailed science. And so we set up very sophisticated labs. We have one at Tokyo Institute of Technology. We have one at Carnegie Mellon that does formal mathematics. There's a laboratory at University of Wyoming, University of Edinburgh over in Scotland. a lab at University of Athens. Greek food's great, so it's nice to have a lab there.
Yeah.
And we've written over 140 academic papers. And then we have engineers that meet those papers and they translate those protocols into secure implementations that are globally useful. Everything we do is open source, and we've never filed for a patent. So the intellectual property is available to everybody. So we don't have to worry about IP theft and trade secrets or all these. We don't really have a lot of secrets in my company. We just go around and do transformations, and that's a really refreshing because it makes it so much easier to talk to people and collaborate. Generally, don't have to worry too much about NDAs or these types of things. And it's been a hell of a ride. I've been to 72 countries since I founded the company in 2015, and gone from 2 people to 700 people, and now we're a multi-billion-dollar business. And it really has been an incredibly educational and rewarding experience thinking about these types of problems.
So there's 2 things that I want to highlight. You were talking about the Kashmir one, right? So let's put it on the ground in Mongolia, and the Kashmir can be one great example. The other one is we have an ample livestock, about
80 million.
80 million,
Yeah.
right? Meat traceability, or you called it farm to table, local production traceability.
Yeah, from
right?
goat to coat.
Yeah. So if you could just put it into a perspective of an average, we call them mulching actually, average goat herders and the livestock herders, what would it seem like, and what do you need to actually make those change right now in Mongolia?
So that's one of the reasons why we came. We've been engaging with collections of people, from people on the agricultural side to people in the private sector, people in the NGO side, having that very question. Every country has a certain level of readiness. I was out in Uji with the eagle hunters, and a very traditional ger, and learning about eagle hunting. And then suddenly one of them got a call on Facebook Messenger. Okay, so you have this stereotype of, well, they're unconnected, but the reality is 95% of people in Mongolia have smartphones, and they're very well connected. There's an overabundance of communication. So usually the first problem when you try to put in a digital system, whether it be digital identity or digital communication, is connectivity. Burundi has this issue. 9 out of 10 people aren't connected, and so it's quite the opposite. So the first step is if people are connected, then you move to level 2, which is identity. And you say, how do we get good identities that allow you to verify claims and start making reputational assessments? And then once you have that, then you can start talking about infrastructure. Now, some of that infrastructure can be lending infrastructure. So I need some capital to prepare for next season. Liquidity, so maybe they don't have to keep as many livestock, because right now the livestock is kind of like the bank account. That's how they store wealth. Maybe we can have different ways of storing wealth that are trusted and reliable. It also can be that now there's direct payment channels, incentives models. So if you want to stay warm during the winter, maybe you burn something different that's more environmentally sustainable, and the government's willing to subsidize that or pay for that, or an NGO is willing to subsidize or pay for that, because it's a small cost to the global community. But if it's not paid, it creates a lot of harm in terms of air pollution. So it really depends on the problem that you're trying to solve. But the key is, for it to be useful, it has to not require dramatic lifestyle changes or cultural changes in order to be successful. And the problem with financial inclusion at the moment in the global marketplaces is we seem to have this idea that the end goal is to remove the nomad. The end goal is to urbanize. The end goal is to go move to a city. The end goal is to have an HOA, these types of things. That would be catastrophically damaging to the culture of Mongolia and frankly, counterproductive. The goal ought to be allow people to live the lives that they want to live, but give them the ability to have economic agency. Meaning where and when they want to get liquidity, where and when they want to sell products, they have equal access to the marketplaces that I have, or Bill Gates has, or Jeff Bezos has, or these big people have. There's never been a time in human history where we've had systems that have enabled such a thing. Usually your power was directly proportional to your proximity to a large hierarchical organization, like a church or a palace or an educational institution. And the higher in that hierarchy, the better food you got, the better relationships you could have, the more land you have, and so forth. So if you lived in the countryside, you're basically a non-person. You just don't exist. for society. So now we have a situation where you can give identity, agency, and so forth, and you have to do it on a case-by-case basis. The key is universality, though. And so what I mean by that is that if you can get them in a supply chain to sell cashmere and get a better price, that same credential can then be reused for a payment system, a lending system, a reputation system, a voting system, and so forth. So it tends to solve a lot of problems. And so the key for real life implementation is just find the person who wants to solve one of those problems the most. And they tend to pay for that infrastructure to get it in. And then the rest of it is downstream value for society as a whole. But what we've noticed being in Ethiopia, Kenya, and other places is actually not that expensive. Right now in Ethiopia, we're getting 5 million students onto a blockchain system we have called Atala Prism. And they're all K through 12 students, so kindergarten to high school. And all of their academic credentials are being onboarded into our blockchain. Well, that's 1.5 times the population of Mongolia. And that's just one deal. So that whole deal costs about $1.5 million to service. So, that's Ethiopia, and there's certainly difficulties. There's a civil war going on. So you can't tell me that Mongolia would be more difficult to do that kind of digital transformation. So you just find good public partners, private partners, some NGOs, people who already have a network effect. So companies that have historical business relationships like the Gobis of the world and others they can be great partners in this. And then you just kind of drill down until you can find a way to give people economic identity. And then you can build financial literacy and digital literacy from that economic identity. And once you have it, then what you can do is build all the services. And it may take 5 years, 6 years. Ethiopia, we've been there for 3 years. I don't think the full deal will be completely realized for another 4 years. So all in 7 years of effort to do these types of things. So I suppose the last part of it is patience. Most of these public-private partnerships, they take 3 to 7 years, a lot of planning, a lot of setbacks, and education on all sides, including with government officials and ourselves to get there. You also need a domestic workforce that's capable of doing these things. That's why education is so important to us. We spend an enormous amount of time working with local assets because they speak the language, they understand the culture, they know where things are at. That allows you to actually speed up and not run into bottlenecks.
So that's why you're holding these digital training programs in Mongolia right now.
Yeah.
For Haskell, a programming language required to write on Cardano, right? Right. I believe Mongolia can be a great place for innovation and blockchain implementation. You talk about this you call this RealFi, right? Okay. I recommend our viewers to check out RealFi and read about it more. As we talked about, there's 3 layers. The first one is infrastructure, and the second one is identity, and the third one is real-world applications. Okay, so I wanted to go into the global market situation right now. And as we all may know, the market it's different. It's in interesting times. What's your opinion on the global market in terms of blockchain and in terms of cryptocurrency?
Well, it's impossible to talk about the macros of cryptocurrency without talking also about the overall economy, because they seem to be correlated. The equity markets, bond markets, all the markets are quite weak, especially in the United States, and inflation is running rampant. It's 9.1% right now in the United States, and that's the reported number. The real numbers are higher. I'd argue 20 to 30% inflation at the moment. So why is that? Well, first, the pandemic destroyed the global supply chains, and there's a collection of deeply unfortunate policy that has badly damaged people and created a huge amount of wealth transfer from the poor to the rich. In the United States, for example, about a third of all of the small restaurants in New York went out of business because of the COVID policies that came through. And the wealthy people got very, very wealthy. Look at the increase in wealth for Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and so forth. They're doing quite well. Meanwhile, the middle class and the poor have been damaged, which of course causes a lot of civil unrest, and it expresses itself differently. So in the case of the United States, it resulted in political change from one party to another party. In the case of Russia, it emboldened the totalitarian government there to become more aggressive in the geopolitical theater and try to use that as a way of shoring up its power base. So the macros are not healthy. And this is directly connected to, in my view, bad monetary policy that has promoted inflation of stocks and the devaluing of the world reserve currency, the dollar. When I was going to university not too long ago, we had $4 trillion in debt. The United States actually had a surplus. Now we have well over $20 trillion in debt, and we're running a huge deficit, and we have runaway inflation. There's not many more years that can happen before the dollar collapses. And the fear of that is having profound consequences across the markets. Add in that China has gone from an economy that was getting more open and was liberating, it was attempting to welcome the world into its borders, to an economy that's getting more closed and mercantilist with this Belt and Road policy. So suddenly Western companies aren't as welcome in Beijing as they used to be. Hong Kong is no longer a bastion of liberal democracy. It's now just a proxy of China. So those factors, what they effectively do is they change how countries communicate, trade, and work with each other. And that disruption of global order has real-life economic consequences. It makes everything more expensive in the supply chains. It makes it more difficult to do things. It makes it more difficult to travel. Places people would go to find jobs they can no longer go to, and so forth. Well, that means anything that's downstream of that will be impacted. So crypto is no different. If the stock market collapses, the crypto market probably is going to take a hit. If people are having a reduction in disposable income and savings, they're going to divest their crypto assets into regular assets to try to survive. Because they have to feed themselves, they have to pay rent. They have to get through these tough times. So the crypto markets are just a reflection in that respect. The good news is that the only way I think we're going to get out of this is with peace and trade and with normalization and standardization of systems. Well, blockchain offers that to people. If you can't make any headway with the systems that the world order currently has, maybe you can send cryptocurrencies to each other. Like microfinance is a great example of that. You can go through the legacy traditional banking system in Kenya and have 12 sets of hands touch money that's moving around and pay an 18% remittance fee. Or you could do a peer-to-peer transaction and send a transaction directly from the United States to Nairobi and pay 1 penny for that transaction fee, and only one set of hands touch it, the one you intended to get that value. So you can't tell me that a system like that's not going to increase commercial activity. It's not going to improve international relations, and ultimately, I think, build a better economy and a more stable and resilient economy. So I think the things like in Russia and the zero COVID policy in China and these aggressive behaviors, there probably will be a global de-escalation, but it probably will take a few years for that to clear. A U.S. monetary policy, we have to figure out how to get through that. And if we don't, I do believe we're headed for a Great Depression worse than the one in the 1920s and 30s. And we have to figure out what to do. So it's a balancing act in that respect. But overall, I'm very optimistic, principally because crypto belongs to the young. If you look at people under the age of 30, the vast majority of them know about cryptocurrencies, and the vast majority are more likely to own an NFT or a cryptocurrency than a stock or a bond. So if the investment preferences of the people who will run the world in 20 years is in our space, then we're basically the future. Those preferences aren't going to change in that respect. So there will be a lot of capital that moves. The other thing is there's a global regulatory question at the moment. The United States has yet to pass comprehensive cryptocurrency legislation, nor has the European Union. And China has decided to close itself off from this market and just dominate from the top. What that means is that it's very hard for smaller countries to decide what to do because they feel like, well, we're in a gray area. Is this pro-US? Is this anti-US? Who knows? Is this pro-Europe? Is this anti-Europe? Who knows? Is this pro-China, anti-China? We don't know. And so the natural reaction is to be conservative and just do nothing until these powers decide what they want to do. The good news is that most jurisdictions are converging to meaningful regulation. Dubai is, Saudi Arabia is, so the Middle East is moving in. China and India are. Japan already has, and Korea is getting there. The United States, I think, will get there in 2023 with some sort of variant of the Financial Innovation Act. And at that point, more institutional money will enter, more retail money will enter, and I think the markets will recover very strongly and exceed their all-time highs of 2021. But that is always counterbalanced to the threat of global conflict, the threat of hyperinflation, and other macro factors that are black swan events that are beyond our current control.
So actually, Mongolia is a leading country in terms of cryptocurrency.
Yeah, you guys passed.
You might have heard.
Yeah, you passed legislation back in December.
Yes, virtual asset providers law,
Yeah.
right? Actually, there's this non-confirmed, but there was this news article back in January that said 1 in 6 Mongolians own some sort of token or cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
And last year alone, we've raised almost $500 billion Tugriks, which is $200 million from the market in terms of token through initial exchange offering or initial coin offering. So I'm sure you might have met some of the people and some might have had a chance to get to know some of the projects that are being undertaken in Mongolia. What are some of the projects that got your attention, if there's any?
Well, I mean, there's lots of cool things like Mongol NFT is really interesting, and it's led by a few young kids, and they're doing interesting work. There's a lot of infrastructure products that are trying to get things like medical records and educational records. I think that's ICT Group. There's a lot of these things, and there's a good balance between them. The exchanges here, there's many more of them. When I first came here, I think there was 1 or 2.
Now there's 24.
Yeah, I heard 14, so 24. There we go. And there was only about 1,000 or 2,000 ADA holders, and now there's 140,000 in the country, which is just crazy because we didn't do any marketing here. So that's organic growth in that respect. Another thing, at the all-time high in 2021, the leading exchanges here were doing 1,000 times the trade volume of the Mongolian Stock Exchange. So certainly there was a lot more liquidity than I think it was an $80 million or $90 million a day turnover in those marketplaces, which is remarkable. So it's a fast-growing, exciting market. And I think it also has to do with the fact that, as I mentioned, many Mongolians understand Russian, Chinese, Korean, Japanese. So they're able to consume the media, the ideas, and also act as proxies and engage with people from those countries. And you sum up the economies, U.S. economy, the Chinese economy, Russian, Japanese economy, it's basically more than 60, 70% of the entire global GDP. And so if you have the linguistic ability to interface with more than half of all the wealth of the world, and cryptocurrencies are global by nature, effectively you're playing in that marketplace. It's as if you're in New York City in that respect. And so there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think Mongolia could play a role much like Switzerland plays to Germany, where Germany tends to be a bit more conservative and rigid in the way that they think about financial regulation and innovation. And Switzerland has always been a bit more open and welcoming to international parties. And, China is being very rigid and in their thinking, and they're preventing that marketplace from organically growing. Well, that destruction and loss is actually Mongolia's gain in that respect. And a lot of money, jobs, and effort could actually come to Mongolia just from that perspective. So there are things certainly like that. And it's incredible to see how quickly it grew. But, I'm just the Wyoming rancher that came here. So I came to learn and listen and to interface with people and try to get a good sense of where things are going. If I had an ideal outcome for our time here, I would love to see a few things done. I'd love to work with the government on a digital transformation involving digital identity and voting and other things, because I think it would just be great as an example and would make Mongolia a world leader and put it much beyond Germany, England, United States, or China. And that would be so fun to do and not really that expensive. It would be a really good project. Second, I'd like to build that developer hub that I mentioned. Third, I'd like to do a real cool end-to-end supply chain. Kashmir is fun because you can go, as they say, from goat to coat. You can go from the farmer, the rancher, all the way up to the store and tell that story every step of the way. And it really showcases the power of a blockchain supply chain system. And finally, actually, I'm a big believer in cultural preservation. So, Mongolia has things like deer stones and a lot of ancient texts and some artifacts from the old Mongol Empire and some things from the Turk era, like thousands and thousands of years ago. It would be really cool to take all of those and actually integrate them into some sort of NFT metaverse play and allow people around the world to see them, almost like a giant digital museum. But then by interfacing with that digital museum, actually, it generates revenue for cultural preservation here and protects the deer stones and protects the monuments and so forth. My ranch in Wyoming, we have a lot of things from the Native American era. There was Paleolithic Indians and Neolithic Indians on my ranch. So you find a lot of artifacts from arrowheads and other things. And just living in that nature, it's given me a very strong appreciation for preserving things that are thousands of years old in the past. And sometimes we, as humans, do a very poor job of that because we're so short-termed in our mindset, and we have to preserve that legacy. So it would be really cool to do that here. And actually, the solutions here could inform a standard for how to do cultural preservation throughout the entire world and make it much better. So that's kind of a nice mixed bag, a little bit of education, a little bit of digital transformation, a little bit of supply chain, some real world use cases, some real interesting challenges, and then some fun things, like metaverse and NFT and these types of things. And it'd be great to work with local partners on that.
Yeah. So to get more information on that, what would be the next step for the people who are watching this in terms of developer hubs? So let's say they were interested in learning to write in Haskell. And what about the partners who would want to work with you in the fields that you mentioned?
So here in Mongolia, at some point, we will open an office. And we've actually joined AmCham, the American Chamber of Commerce in Mongolia. We're having the ceremony tonight for it. And we're just trying to figure out what's the best way to enter the country from a legal standpoint and the type of hierarchy required to operate. We do have some employees here who are Mongolian. They live here in Ubi, but we need to formalize those relationships and come up with a much more clear strategy. And then we need to get a sense of, first, how quickly the business community wants to move, and then how quickly the academic community wants to move, and then how quickly the government wants to move. We're a patient company. So if the movement is a matter of years, we can do that. If it's weeks and months, we can do that too. It's just basically those preferences. In terms of interfaces, once you're integrated, then it's easy to host community events, educational events, and most of the things we do are free. All of our educational content we tend to put on YouTube and other platforms. We don't charge anything for it. We also have a dense network of relationships and partners who also give away education for free for the most part. Like, for example, we work very closely with the Blockchain Research Institute that Dan Tapscott runs. And there they have the most popular blockchain courses on Coursera. I think 3 million or 4 million people have taken them. Very popular courses. And in partnership with INSEAD, which is the #1 business school in the world, or at least in the top 5. It's right up there with Harvard Business and the rest. So my recommendation is if you want to do something blockchain, don't think blockchain, think solution. What problem are you trying to solve? What is important to you? And then educate yourself. And almost all of the education is available for free online. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to invest in anything. Who cares about Cardano and Ethereum and Bitcoin? These are tools. Okay. And it's kind of silly to say, hey, I want to be a gardener. Which tools should I buy? The first question you ask is, well, what type of garden do you want to grow? Do you want to grow flowers? Do you want to grow pumpkins? What are you growing? And then what space do you have available? And then and only then do you start talking about the specific tools that you need to accomplish that. And obviously you have to be trained in all those techniques to know how to tend a garden. It's the same with blockchain. We can get there, but our tools are really made for government scale, and they're really made for big enterprises. And they certainly do work at the individual level. But it requires a little bit of training to acclimate and figure that out. And with the partners that work with us, we certainly train them.
That's a good metaphor in terms of the garden one, actually. So last but not least, let's say someone who is watching this wants to know more about cryptocurrency, but his knowledge is from all over the place, from social media, from the TV, from their favorite influencer or whatever, or something like that. What would be the steps you would have taken if you were a young person who would be interested in blockchain and cryptocurrency?
Yeah, I guess this is where the age divide comes in. So if you're an older person, my recommendation is buy a book, and there's dozens and dozens and dozens of good ones, from Digital Asset Revolution to Age of Cryptocurrency and so forth. And any of these books that give you a nice overview of why cryptocurrency and blockchain is interesting. If you're younger, just go to YouTube. there's thousands of how-to videos, tutorial videos, and some of them are by very prominent people. Like there's an introduction to blockchain by Dan Boneh. He's a world-famous professor at Stanford. There's a whole series of classes from MIT on YouTube, 24 lectures on cryptocurrencies. And again, they're all free. Book is like what, $20? So it's not a lot of money. This is what I'd recommend. Start there and really focus on, be an active reader, not a passive reader. Why? What problem are we solving? What problem are we solving? And hammer that away. So don't buy any cryptocurrencies. Just do that first and see if it excites you. And if these are things that you care about. And then once you care about those things, you can start asking the next question, which is, what are the solutions in market? Because there's over 20,000 blockchains in market. What are the solutions in market that actually are tailored to solve the types of things I'm interested in, whether it be an IoT thing or value transfer or whatever it has to be. And then and only then does it make sense to start interfacing and building things and using the cryptocurrencies and so forth. But you kind of have to understand the philosophy and the point and the purpose before you just go and rapidly speculate. Otherwise, you're being quite uninformed in that respect.
That's actually quite a perfect advice. Anyway, any last remarks you would like to make to our viewers?
There's no rush. I've been around long enough to see many changes in the economy, and innovation and movements are like trains. If you miss one, another one will come. All the mistakes I've made in my life, all the problems I've had were a direct result of moving too quickly, making decisions with incomplete information. If cryptocurrency and blockchain is here to stay, and it's going to be as transformative as we say as an industry, 50 years from now, people are going to be building cryptocurrency ventures and cryptocurrency products and so forth. Look at the internet. The internet came out in the 1970s. People are doing web startups all the time right now, 50 years later. So obviously, there's no rush. So take your time and really dig into the principles of these things and ask fundamental questions. How should power be distributed? Should it be a king or a dictator or a leader at the top, or should power be pushed to the edges? Should you have the ability to verify claims that people make yourself without having to trust people? Do you want to know more information about the things that you put in your body, the food that you eat, these types of things, or not? Do you want to have control and agency over your financial relationships? Do you want to be your own bank and have control over your own money? These basic concepts and principles, well, if you answer yes to those types of things, you need blockchain technology. This is what our industry does. Everything else is an implementation detail. And there's going to be some mistakes and there's ups and downs, but that's the truth. That's the core of what we're trying to solve and who we're at. And the real people will be here 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and they'll continue to innovate. Microsoft was started in the 1970s. I think it was 1976. 77, somewhere in that time frame, and it's still here. It's a very different company, obviously, but it's still here, and the core of the company is the same. The use of technology to make life better and improve your productivity and improve the things that you want to do, the dreams that you have. And it's the same with blockchain. The blockchains will be radically different in 10 years. They're already radically different from when I entered the industry. When I entered, you couldn't issue assets. You didn't have DeFi. There were no dApps, no smart contracts, none of these types of things. Now it's like we have crypto kitties and NFTs like Bored Apes and metaverses and all these. It's crazy what we have today. And that's just like 8 years later.
Yeah.
So 10 years, oh my Lord, it'll be nuts what it's different. But the core is still the same. We're trying to keep those basic principles of decentralization and inclusive accountability and globalization and equality throughout.
Okay, so there you go, folks. And that was a very interesting question that I've had. That was Charles, the founder of Cardano, founder and CEO of IO Global, and the co-founder of Ethereum. So see you next time. Thank you for being here, Charles.
Thank you so much. Cheers.